to 20 minutes.
Okay. Dr. Hans Spalteholz,
Linda.
tell me about the spiritual life of your background, your childhood.
I think what marks my spiritual life and that of our entire family was that we read the so-called Losungen, that's the German word for the daily texts, which have been put out now for about 273 years by the Moravian, actually the Herrenhut community, founded by Ludwig Graf von Zinzendorf, a small community of very missionary-minded people who send missionaries all over the world. And they have been publishing a book of daily texts for 275 years now. And it's a text that is translated into many languages, and so all of our relatives read those texts. And as children, that's the first sort of spiritual formation besides morning and evening prayers that we had at our bedside or wherever we had our...
Okay, so maybe I should ask, this is in Germany?
No, this is here in America.
This is here in the States?
My parents were immigrants, both of them. And my mother was from Austria, my father from Holland, but they were both German-speaking, basically. And so, anyway, getting back to your question about, the spiritual roots, we're in our familial bonding to these texts. We did not cherish what they meant at that time, but my wife and I still read them every morning. We read them this morning. Then beyond that, we had Sunday school and had a church community in Newark, New York.
Okay.
And we thought that was sort of what the Christian life was all about, going to Sunday school at Redeemer Lutheran Church in Newark.
Okay.
And
did you have siblings?
2 sisters, both younger than I.
Okay.
And so we all still read these. They read them in English, but since my wife is German, we still read them in German.
Did you grow up speaking German, though? I have this in my head that you did.
When I went into my first day of kindergarten, I couldn't speak a word of English.
Okay.
Not a word.
Okay.
And I had an embarrassing experience because I needed to do something, but I didn't know how to say what I needed to do. And we were sitting on the floor, and all of a sudden I sat in a puddle. And my kindergarten teacher knew what I needed. Too late. Get the mop.
What a traumatic way to start your academic life.
It was an unforgettable way.
Yeah.
And then she walked me to the greenhouses, which was maybe half a mile away, because they sent me to the school, which was near the greenhouses, and then my dad took me home. But I remember this too. When she said goodbye, she said to me, "Give me a hug." And I just looked at her because, again, I didn't understand any English, and that didn't make any sense at all. So that was my second memory.
Another nick on the psyche. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, this was a public school?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, Perkins School.
Okay.
It's called.
Yeah. Then how did you come to be at Concordia, Portland? Can you say a little bit about your journey?
Well, yes, interesting. One of my first experiences beyond our little church was we went to a summer camp, and I couldn't believe it that there were so many other Lutheran kids. And we had a wonderful time at this camp, and there was a speaker there who we loved to hear on the radio. He was the speaker of the Lutheran Hour. It was Dr. Walter A. Meyer.
And he came to your camp?
He was at our camp because his family cottage was in Olcott, New York, and that's where his family were spending their summers.
And so he had a son that you got to know too,
He
right?
spoke there.
Yeah.
My mother had a knack for getting to know people.
Okay.
And she quickly got to know the Meyers, and they fell in love with her and so on. And he was doing a lecture series on the minor prophets. And I'm not sure which one he was on, but he once spoke about people who are diamonds in the rough. And where that image came from, the minor prophets, don't ask me, even though I know them pretty well. But anyway, diamonds in the rough. And he said, there are diamonds in the rough right here in this group. And he was looking right at me, you know. And afterwards, he came over and talked to me a little bit. And the short and long of it was that he said, why don't you think of going to Concordia College, Concordia Collegiate Institute in Bronxville?
Concordia Collegiate Institute in Bronxville.
That's our sister school in Bronxville. and he said, maybe the Lord wants you to go into ministry. And that's the place where you can find that out.
And Walter Meyer is the one who said that to you.
That's right.
Wow. And did you say yes right away, or did you go out on a drinking binge, or what?
Well, I was just a little boy, you know, at that time. Just past confirmation class.
Okay.
No, I didn't go anywhere, but no, a little bit past confirmation class. But in any case, I did go to Concordia, and that was sort of the initial call.
Wow.
Yeah.
And from there?
Well, from there, like my classmates, and we had a large class, I think as many as who were going to go to the seminary in St. Louis, I became more and more unsure. I said, I'm not cut out to be a pastor, and I'm not sure what I want to be. So we were all going there. We had a retreat, and that didn't clarify anything, except it was a really good retreat. It's the first spiritual retreat we ever had. A pastor led it. And that summer, I was involved in a volunteer work camp. No, that came later. Let's see. No, I was involved in a number of volunteer situations.
Okay.
And the first one, the first really significant one was when I was at the seminary already, and someone said to me, you should go to a work camp in Europe somewhere if you can. So the World Council of Churches had work camps.
Okay.
And I went to one of these work camps, and there I met all sorts of other people who were post-World War II survivors, young people from different countries, some enemy countries, Germans, some Norwegians, and we all had to get along with each other, and it was a very intense time, and we had lots of good conversations. And it was the first time that I realized that somehow, if we wouldn't have had devotions together and a person who led us in the devotions together, we would have fractured. And the first time I really saw there was a connection between life and our faith. I remember that so distinctly.
Wow.
And that encouraged me to stay in there with the ministry.
Did you expect then to come out and teach, or did you expect that you were going to become a parish pastor?
Oh no, that came much later. When I left the seminary, or when I was graduating from the seminary, I was unsure what I should do, really unsure, because I didn't feel I was called out to be a pastor. But I thought, well, here I am, I have to do something. And at that time, I had the opportunity to study in Europe, in Göttingen. So I studied there for a year.
Theology, I assume.
Well, I studied whatever I wanted to, and it was wonderful. Yeah. I was very interested. I had some wonderful art courses. You could go to any lecture. You didn't have to write exams. You just went and listened.
Right.
And you know how the system is. You go for 8 semesters, and then you say, well, I'm ready to stand for the exams. So I wasn't involved in that. But then I had another really formative experience, because my uncle was a director, one of the co-directors of what they called the academies. But they were retreat centers for lay people in various constellations of life callings. So I'll give you a couple of examples. For example, they had a meeting of secretaries who worked with bosses in some kind of a business. This
Okay.
is all after the war. And I was in on how they structured this. And so they talked, what are the problems you secretary have? We sat around a coffee and had coffee in a little restaurant. And they talked about, well, our relationship to our bosses is much more intimate than it is to our husbands, because we are with them 8 hours. We come home, we put meals on the table, we take care of the kids, and we go to bed. And so that's one problem. And so they discussed various problems. Then when they had a retreat for secretaries from wherever, it was the secretaries who spoke, and they had a couple of theologians who would react to what the secretaries would say. But rather than the church being on a pulpit and preaching at people, they had vocational groups together, and they had devotions in the morning and in the evening, but they would lead really the direction of the conversation. And it was another time where I saw, my gosh, there's a relation between faith and life, and it's very down to earth. It's about real people having real
secretaries,
problems. Secretaries.
Yeah.
The very first one, I wasn't there, but I heard about it, so it was very significant, was with the leading publishers of newspapers in Germany when the war was over, and everybody had, what did they call it? They had some monetary change where everybody was leveled, and they started from scratch. They had a word for remonetization, I guess.
Okay.
In any case, that's not important. What is important, they got the chief publishers from all the major papers, Frankfurter Allgemeine, Südwestdeutschland, and so on. What are we going to do as publishers of papers that will make a difference so that Germany will never, this will never happen again in Germany, what happened in these 12 years under Hitler?
Okay.
That's how it got. They brought their own, they had to bring potatoes, they had to bring spoons, they had nothing there. And this place was called Bad Boll, B-A-D-B-O-L-L. And that was the beginning of the academies, and the whole, and I was there for about a month to watch it. My uncle was a director, so I lived with him. I was fortunate as can be to have that experience. So again, it persuaded me that there was a relationship between faith and life, which I really had questions about that, because it seemed so irrelevant, I thought, from my very limited experience in my little church. We went to church, and then we lived in our 6 days
compartmentalization. Yeah. And so how did this bring you to Portland and teaching?
Well, I was there for a whole year after the seminary.
Okay.
And usually they set up a call system, but I wasn't involved in the usual call system because I was off on this sabbatical, or not sabbatical, on this year of study.
Gap year.
Post whatever.
You were taking a gap year before it was
gap year before.
To take a gap year. Okay, keep going.
Well, then I got a letter from Tommy Coates. He said,
President Thomas Coates.
President Dr. Thomas Coates.
Okay.
We called him Tommy, President Coates. And he said, we understand that you are available. And we need someone to teach English. We'd like to invite you to come and teach English. I wrote back a letter. I said, I love literature. I love English. I don't know about my writing, but I have absolutely no training, so I'm going to have to decline this. Basically,
you said no.
Yes, and I gave the reasons.
Okay.
And he wrote back a letter. The essence of it was, I'll never forget. He said to me, because you write the letter in the way in which you write the letter and the kind of letter you've written, we know you should be here. So he came right back at me. So I had a very good friend, Walter Bowman, who was studying in Heidelberg when I was studying in Göttingen, and we saw each other off and on. And he and I talked, and he said, I think you should go there. It sounds to me right for you. So I decided to come after all, even though I thought I knew nothing about teaching English. And I've been here ever since. I was just going to see how it works out.
Okay. And I understand that you lived in the basement of a widowed woman's home. Is that right?
You understood that from Dwayne Brand, I imagine, because he was there before I was. And then Florence Gaylord, invited me, or I'm not sure just how it went, but then I lived in the other room in the basement.
So you came out here as a bachelor, and you're going to teach English, literature.
Right.
And Art Wallers is here, and Thomas Coates is the president.
Thomas Coates was the president, but he wasn't here because he was doing missionary work in Japan.
Oh.
So I think Art Wallers, if I'm no, not Art. Carl Keller was the
Acting president.
acting president.
Okay.
And then Dr. Coates only came back later. And there was always interesting relations in respect to Tommy. We always called him Tommy, Dr. Coates.
Okay. And so you came out here with a love of literature, and what were you teaching?
Well, I taught two things. Basically, I taught writing, composition, and I taught literature. But I taught high school and college, so I had a huge load, like about 25 hours. I don't know how I did that. I taught freshman comp in college, and then I taught, I think, high school literature. No, high school English. So that was 5 days a week, if I remember correctly. plus the college intro to writing class.
Okay. And what was life like here on campus? Spiritual life, real actual everyday life. Any stories, meal times, anything?
You know, I've reflected about that. I think the most striking thing about it in retrospect is there was a tremendous sense of family. We were a small faculty. We all sat around a table. All the faculty sat around a table in the dining room. When the students were eating, we were eating at lunch. And we had virtually a faculty meeting every day. So it was remarkable. And Willie Pryor was the cook and much beloved, great caretaker, concerned about students, loved them. If a student needed a pair of shoes, there's this story that a pair of shoes were on that student's doorstep. When he got out of opened the door the next morning, there were a pair of shoes for him, and the right size, too.
What was the student body size then? High school, junior
there
college?
There were 120 students altogether, if I remember correctly.
Including the high school?
Including the high school.
120.
So we were very small.
And when did women come on campus? When were
they were
included?
There, I think, a year or two before I came.
Okay.
They came.
Early 60s then?
Yes. I don't have those exact dates.
No, that's fine.
It's not important. But there were girls there on the campus. Dr. Coates said when they first talked about women coming on campus, that's a famous quote, you probably heard it from someone else, over my dead body.
Really? No, I haven't heard that.
No.
Dr. Coates said that women will come on campus over my dead body. Okay.
Right. But they came and it wasn't over his dead body.
So he was actually here when the transition happened?
Oh, yes. Oh,
Oh my gosh, that's great.
Well, you know, his idea was a boys' school, a men's school,
Sure.
Segregating them, getting them ready for ministry. He himself was a bachelor. And
Yeah.
he had his favorite students.
It was a different world back then.
It was a completely
culture.
different world.
Okay.
But family was the big experience that I would say we were in chapel every day. We had chapel in the evening, 4 days a week, and we had very good participation in all of these things. So we had communion service together. That was a really big thing, and that continued to be important. When I went away for a year to work on my master's in English at Columbia, and
Hold that thought. Master's degree at Columbia. And we're going to change tapes.